Okay. Hello, humans in healthcare. Welcome back to another episode of The Other Human in the Room. I'm so excited to be having another healthcare human conversation this week with someone that I am meeting for the first time on the podcast, which is the theme of a lot of the conversations I have, where this is a way that I can just talk to interesting people that I want to talk to anyway. I invite them on a podcast. Shannon, I'll let you introduce yourself. But I'll first share just a bit of how I discovered you, which is we both practice in the same community, the same city, Guelph in Ontario. And I just heard so many good things about what you offer in terms of parenting and strategies of how to help parents, especially with kids who are maybe neurodivergent or are spirited in some way. And I just thought, well, I definitely need to get to know you. This is so cool. And your content on Instagram is amazing. And also, for those of us in healthcare, I thought it would be useful in two perspectives. First of all, a bunch of us are parents,
Mhm.
myself included. So I just would love your advice. And also, a lot of us are patients or parents, and we're seeing that dynamic in the room, in the clinic room. And I think that's an interesting thing. I'm imagining they're all going to play out in the same way because at the end of the day, we're humans and have human brains wherever we go. So,
Mhm.
with all of that as a first thing, please introduce yourself
Okay,
to our
I'd
audience.
love to. Yeah, that sounds great. So, my name is Shannon Rolph, and I am a pediatric occupational therapist. What that looks like, I work in private practice. So, I've got my own little gig, and I kind of split my practice into three different areas. So, I work with kids one on one in the way that OTs traditionally would. I also run nature based small groups with kids. So we go out into the forest, and the focus of those groups is on specifically building social skills and confidence, um, which is so fun. So that's been a real highlight of my practice lately.
Mm,
And then the third piece is I work specifically with parents in a parent coaching capacity. And the reason that's a new addition to my practice this year. And the reason that I pulled that on is I was finding that there were a lot of families out there who didn't feel that their child needed therapy necessarily. They didn't feel that they needed to come for one-on-one OT or even group, but they still needed a little bit of support just to make things easier. And so sometimes that parent coaching looks like one or two sessions to kind of brainstorm around a tricky situation. And sometimes it's more of an ongoing relationship where I support in kind of a bigger way, sometimes around, yeah, emotional regulation or raising neurodiverse kids.
yeah,
But that's a really fun part of my practice too. Yeah.
that's awesome. How did you come to this work?
Yeah,
And
that's a really good question. So so interesting talking to a physician. So my original plan was to be a pediatrician. I still clearly remember I did my undergrad at Western, and being in a first year biology class, and it was in alumni gym. So it was this gymnasium full of students, hundreds of students.
yeah.
And the prof said, "Okay, put up your hand if you're planning to apply to med school." And I swear three-quarters of those people put up their hands. And I was like, okay, I'm out. That was it. I was like,
No,
okay,
thank you.
yep, I don't think I'm going to compete with all of you guys. So I don't think that's it. So then I spent a few years trying to figure out what that other thing might be. So I have a sister with global developmental delay. And so I grew up seeing lots of different types of therapies and the way that they worked with her and my family. And then I also, throughout my undergrad, worked as a support worker. So I worked with kids with special needs, supporting them so that their family could have some respite. And through that work, I also got to interact with lots of different types of therapy and see the way that they impacted these families. And there was one family in particular I worked with. So they had an older, I think 3-year-old, and twins who were infants when I started working with them. And the one infant she needed a G tube. So she was fed through a G tube. Um, and the way that they were feeding her for a long time was at night. They would hook up the G tube, but they had her in like a bouncy chair. This was like 15 years ago. So like, I guess that was an okay thing then, because they needed her on an incline so that as the G tube was feeding her, she wouldn't aspirate. So she outgrew this chair, and the family was looking at needing to purchase specialized medical equipment, which was hundreds of dollars. And their OT came in and she took a pair of men's underwear and sewed it into a wedge cushion to like secure this baby on this incline and was like, look, I just solved your problem.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so that's where I was really like, oh, this is so interesting. Like I really, really loved that in OT, it's a really holistic look at, how do we support the child, but also how do we support the family? Because the family environment is a huge piece of how the child functions.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good story. I just love, and I just love picturing that little baby with
Yeah. Right.
so
I know.
cute.
I know. It was so good. Yeah.
Oh, and so I know you have also shared you're a parent yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
so I'm curious how it's been for you these last few years being a human in healthcare and a parent healthcare human as well.
yeah, it's been a doozy. That's the
Yeah.
short answer. Yeah.
Mhm.
So in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I had a 1, 3, and 5 year old, and had just started my private practice 4 months before.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So left my full-time, actually it was a part-time job, but left my like secure job to start
Yeah.
this private practice. Anyway, so it was hugely stressful.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I found the last few years to be just so challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
And so I think I'm pretty sure I've said it on this podcast. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. And I thought one of the things to really hear from you is for all of those that are both parents and working in healthcare now. So also everyone on the planet's a little bit burnt out, but and
Mhm.
including those in healthcare, quite burnt out, giving your all to your patients or clients all day. And then I hear it so often, like from my clients and colleagues, like, I have nothing to give to my kids at the end of the day. I'm
Mhm.
barely seeing them. Like, it's such a source of stress. And then they also notice how they're not showing up in the way they wish they could for their kids. And that's like an extra layer of shame. And it's like a whole
Yeah.
cycle, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking of there's a few like concept you even shared on Instagram, but I was thinking of vignettes and common things that say you coach your parent clients on.
Mhm.
Um the for and honestly, this is just a way to trick you into giving me a parent coaching session. Which so like I thought of a few scenarios. So the first one being getting your child out the door in the
Yeah.
morning
Yeah.
without someone screaming. I mean,
Yeah.
and if the kid screams, it is okay. But like without me starting losing my cool,
Yes.
like all the work that I have done on myself and the training I've gotten, I'm at least aware. I'm like, okay, my nervous system is being like overstimulated,
Yeah.
but it's so you just feel flooded sometimes, and you
Yeah.
just are trying to get their feet in the boots.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that this is a problem for 90% of the families that I work with. Morning routine is consistently something that comes up. And I think a good chunk of it is that it's really hard for us to show up in a calm way
Yeah.
when there's a time limit. Like there truly is, like we need to get out the door by this time so I can get you to this thing, so I can get me to this thing, and we can think through that time piece and we can logically think back, work our way backwards from if we need to be out the door at 7:30, then you need to be done this at 7:15. And
Yeah.
but our kids don't function that way, right? And often when we show up with that heat, when we show up with that stressed energy, it just exacerbates the problem. And then we're just fighting against each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's your general approach, or especially like are there key things that a lot of your clients find the useful principles to start with if
Mhm.
it's like I know I'm flooded, I'm every situation is individual in some way, but
Yeah.
how do you manage when there is a deadline and the children don't care about time because that's not how their brains work, like you
That's
said.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, okay. So I'll give you a few like examples of strategies that have worked for some families, and I'll tell you what our family does. Um, Maybe I'll start with my family first. I'll tell you what we do, what works for us. So one of the things that I find really helpful for my kids is using a visual schedule so that they're really clear on the things that they need to do that are part of their routine.
Mm,
I like this for two reasons. One is it gives them a little bit of independence and autonomy so they can move through those different steps. And
mm.
the other thing that I really like about it is instead of me being like, get your shoes on, get your shoes on, get your shoes on, please
Yes.
get your shoes on. Now I'm redirecting them to this schedule, right? Hey, what's next in your routine? And then they go and look, and then they are more, not always, right? This is the thing with kids and parenting is the strategy that works for you today might not be the one that works tomorrow. But often, if I can redirect them to the routine, they can move on to that next step. So that's one thing that I find really useful for my kids. And we've been using a visual schedule in our house since, so my oldest is 8 now. So since she started kindergarten.
Okay.
So for years. Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you have like did you like make one?
I did. Yeah. It's
Ah.
available on my website for free.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. I was like, this is really useful for my family. And I'm sure this will be useful for other families too. So you can totally go and grab that. Yeah. It's the same
Yeah.
one that we use.
Okay, perfect.
So a visual schedule I find is really helpful for sure. The other piece that I find is really helpful when I can follow through on it is making sure that we have enough time, right? And so sometimes this means me waking up earlier
Yeah.
and me getting my act in gear a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So I think about controlling the things that we can control in this situation, right? It's really hard to control how quickly my kids decide to get dressed that day, but I can control whether or not I'm dressed and ready before they're out of bed.
Right.
And if I have those pieces done for my routine, then I can show up in a more calm way to support them through those steps if they need that support. And if I show up with calm energy, right, then they're less likely to get stressed and resist, and.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are two things that my family does.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I often suggest to families is like moving through a morning routine and getting in the car to go to school is not often a very motivating thing for most kids.
Right.
Right. It's not necessarily something they're keen to do. And so something that also can be helpful is thinking about, is there something we can kind of put in at the end of that routine that's enticing, right? So in our family, what that looks like is if my kids are ready by 8 o'clock and we have 10 extra minutes, then we'll let them watch a YouTube music video.
Oh,
And so it
I love
becomes a natural consequence also, right? If we
Yes.
take too long to get through our routine, sorry, we don't get to do that today. But if they do move through it with enough time, then we get to do this fun thing. A family that I worked with last week, we talked about the morning routine, and for them, screen time is really tricky, right? It's really tricky to turn off screen time. But one of the things her daughter loves is books and also connecting with mom. And so what she decided to do was at the start of the routine, she'd have her daughter choose a book,
Yeah.
put the book somewhere visible. And then if the routine was done in time, then they'd sit and have a cuddle and read through this book together.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So having something, yeah, I guess so, because depending on with which of the 50 billion parenting
Right.
books you read, rewards kind of, I don't know, rewards versus motivation. You know what I mean? Like, is
Yeah.
this external versus internal motivation? I'm sure you've actually gotten training on this. Like, so it's okay to motivate and have some kind of reward. It's not the same as a bribe. Do you know what I mean? Like some of it's like,
Yeah. And I think it's different than like a sticker chart, right?
right. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And you're right. Like there are definitely different schools of thought on the
Yeah.
benefits of this. One of the things that I always think about is like, is workability, and that what we choose to do, it needs to be working for the whole family.
Yeah.
Right. And so if doing something like this, if reading a book to your kid before you go out the door means that the whole morning is going to go more smoothly for the rest of your family, then
Yeah.
like maybe that's okay.
That has to be it. It's funny. Because like a lot of what I talk about is like there's all these rules, like say in healthcare in general, like and some rules are useful for safety or whatever, but sometimes we use like guidelines and rules and external standards as a way to just like beat ourselves up inside. And I think I realized it's the same thing with parenting, right? So
Yes,
none of the experts fully agree anyway.
that's right.
So actually having, look, we all got out the door and no one screamed at each other.
Yeah.
That's the only metric.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about like really, because you're right, there's so much information out there and available.
Yeah.
I would argue too much, right? It can get really overwhelming. And I find that we can get really stuck in deciding what to do and what is okay and what's not okay, and feeling guilty about whatever we choose because someone is saying it's not okay.
Yes.
But I think that like taking some time to really reflect on your values as a parent and as a family, and using that as kind of a North Star in the decisions that you're making. So circling back to that example of the morning routine and like, is that a reward and is that okay? If connection is a really important value for your family, then maybe that is actually a really lovely thing to do because it's very in line with that value.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's true. Like well, even for yourself and certainly for people you work with, like we I just think it's a whole market, I guess, of like all the different parenting things, and a lot of it gets so like guilt and shame laden, and then
Mm-hmm.
people can get so paralyzed to even know, then it's just another thing. So in the constantly in their head, like I know for me, I've been like I've received coaching about the specific thing of I was like, I'm breaking my children. And so it's like a thought that I was like repeatedly just like, no matter what, I'm breaking my children. Like I would be on the harsher side one day and then be
Mm-hmm.
like, I would picture like my 4-year-old on the therapy couch in 20 years being like, she was too harsh with me. She was too, and then the next day I would be more lenient, and then it would be Felix, my son, on the couch, and it'd be like, she never set any boundaries. Like it was hilarious. My brain was just like, it didn't matter what I did.
That's right.
That's how you know it's not really like problem solving.
Right. Yeah. It's not helpful. That is not helpful.
No.
Yeah.
These like shame-based stories, like,
Yeah.
yeah, values is such a beautiful way to cut that because it's just an individual to the person and to
That's
the
right.
family.
Yeah.
Is that like a process you go through with parents of like reflecting on their values and
Yeah, sometimes,
yeah,
sometimes parents come to me and they really just want to troubleshoot.
yeah.
But sometimes parents come to me and they want to do some of that deeper work.
Hmm.
And when they're ready for that, then yeah, absolutely. It's been part of my journey. So you had asked originally, in this culture of like healthcare burnout, right?
Yeah.
So that was my experience for sure. Moving through the pandemic as a parent and a healthcare professional, it was really, really a lot. And so part of my journey in trying to find my way back from that has been working with another OT, um, who practices using ACT. Have you heard of this? Acceptance and commitment therapy?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the whole premise of ACT is that like a joy-filled life is one where you take actions that are in line with your values, right? And we can have hard thoughts and we can have hard feelings and we can let them be there, and we can still take actions that move us in the direction of the things that are really important to us.
Yeah.
And so, as part of this journey, I've personally been doing a lot of work on my values, and also in my day to day life, noticing the times that I'm taking steps or, engaging in actions that move me away from those things that are important to me, and noticing the times that I'm engaging in things that move me towards the things that I really value.
Oh, and how do you find that that has helped you with your personal burnout? Because like the world
Like
hasn't gotten less
enormously.
nuts, right? Like the
No, that's
world
right.
is wild
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah. I find it's been really helpful, and I've still needed support and accountability
Yeah.
to help me break those patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not really meant to do this alone. That's like probably one of the worst. I call them inhuman stories on the podcast, but like these stories that we've been taught that separate us from ourselves, and like they separate us from each other. So you think you have to
Yeah.
do it all alone,
Yeah.
and like imposter syndrome and stuff is so like I'm the only one, I'm the fraud, everyone else is going to figure me out. And it's that same thing with around burnout too, right? If you think you can't, we all need support, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I recently joined a coaching group,
Mm,
so run by this OT who I started working with,
yeah.
and it's other health professions who are all actively kind of trying to move away from that burnout hustle culture and
Mm,
really working hard to make choices, to engage in things that are in line with their values. And I found that it's just been so helpful to be, it's a Zoom room, but to like be in a Zoom room of other people who are also trying to live in this way.
yeah. How do you find that that then shows up in how you are with your clients,
Mhm.
and whether it's coaching clients or the kids that you work with.
Yeah. So I think that it makes me a much better OT, because what it means is I'm less exhausted. Right?
Funny how that works. You're
I
not
know.
exhausted, you're
Yeah.
better at your job.
Yeah. So I'm able to show up and really be present and really give my all in the sessions that I have, because I've made very mindful choices to pull back on how many clients I'm seeing, to give myself space between client sessions so I'm not constantly running from one thing to the next. Um, and to limit how many clients I'm working with in a week so that, like you said, I was one of those people who came home and I had nothing left to give my family at the end of the day. And so I felt like I wasn't showing up well in my work and I wasn't showing up well in my home. And with these boundaries that I've been putting around my work now, I come home and I still have some gas left in the tank.
Oh, so important.
Yeah.
Um, my second vignette, it compromises our ability to hold boundaries. And so I don't think there's going to be perfect strategies, but parenting while trying to work from home. Like, okay, and maybe you're just going to be like, yeah, it's not even possible, because that's what I feel like now. Like, my child knows every episode of Paw Patrol, because there's times where they're sick and
Totally.
one of the parents is able to stay home. I'm not able to see patients even virtually, and have children present.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work for
Me
me.
too.
But
Yeah.
like on a day where I'm doing more like inbox work, or my husband, who has like meetings and stuff that he's trying to do with kids screaming, which is wild,
Yeah.
then it's honestly, that's our strategy has been so grateful they got to an age where they will sit in front of the TV for a long
Totally.
time.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that? And it not, but like, I actually feel good about it. It's in line
Good.
with our values of not losing our minds.
Yeah. That's right.
And are there strategies that are emerging that are additional to that, or what I mean?
that's that's a really good question. Um, so no, not that I know of,
Right.
right? I will share with you, yeah, some of the things that I have learned, and what I'm finding helpful, though I need to keep circling back to it if I'm being honest. Because again, I think even 2.5 years into this kind of new way of living and being, we still hold ourselves to this standard of like, when I'm
Yes.
working, this is what work looks like, right?
Yeah.
This is what it looks like for me to do my work. Um, but the reality of that situation is you can't, right? Like you can't work to that standard while you are also caring for kids, even if
Yeah.
they're watching screen time, because, even if they're amazing and they sit there and kind of entertain themselves for an hour or two at a time, you still have an ear out, right?
Yeah.
It's still
Of course.
different.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about, so in ACT, in this acceptance and commitment therapy,
Mm.
one of the things that we talk about is that part of the struggle, or part of what makes it so hard, is our resistance to what's happening, right? It's
Yeah.
maybe not even the situation itself, it's our reaction to the situation. And so an analogy that I find really helpful, I actually find this helpful with the morning routine piece too,
Mm.
is picturing, a Chinese finger trap.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got your fingers in a Chinese finger trap, right? You're in this situation. When you resist what's happening,
Yeah.
you get stuck.
Yeah.
And this is not easy, right? Like, here's the other thing, is this really, it takes practice.
Mm.
But being able to recognize that you're in this situation and finding ways to lean into it is
Mhm.
actually how some of that struggle is going to be released.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah. Like, the amount of time I used to spend just being like, this shouldn't be this way. I can't
Yeah.
handle this. This
Yes.
is too hard.
Yeah.
Which, like, I mean, so now, like, I can even tell my brain, like, you are right. This is just like objectively too hard. So, what are we going to do? Understanding like what I'm offering myself that I think I need to do as a standard. You're right. Cannot compute, cannot
Yeah.
be perfect parent, perfect clinician at the same
Totally.
time.
Yeah.
One of those anyway. So then, okay, let's just accept that that's what's happening here,
Yeah.
and say, so what do we want to prioritize? How are we going to be tender with ourselves?
Yeah.
Self-compassion is a huge thing for me, and becoming my own friend and changing that inner dialogue is
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, noticing how much of how my brain used to operate, which is in full resistance of what was happening.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
not so helpful.
No, it's not so helpful. No, it's not. Just makes everything worse, but it doesn't change the situation.
You are still on the same spot. You've just been running in place.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Exactly. It's so true. And like, as it relates to the morning routine, I find that often I need to check in with myself to be like, okay, she's not going to get dressed on her own today. Okay. This,
yeah.
this just is what it is today. I need to
Mhm.
lean into this. I'm going to have to help her through it. Right. Maybe
Yeah.
tomorrow she's going to get dressed on her own.
Mhm.
And I find as parents, this can be one of the things that's so tricky is like cognitively, they are capable of doing the thing,
Yes.
but when they're not doing it, it's so frustrating. And
Yeah.
sometimes we have the time to give them that opportunity to move through that independently. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't, right? And that's that finger trap again, right? What is
Oh,
the situation? What's my reality here?
yes.
Do I need to just lean into this so that we can release from this situation?
Yeah. I have said to my children, you know how to do this many times, and I have noticed doesn't help. It's not harmful. I'm not like, wow, now I've traumatized my child, but I'm like, you know how to do this. And they're still
Yeah.
like, yeah, and I'm not doing it. Like it's
That's
just
great.
like, and because especially my little 2-year-old is getting all of his words and he's just like, I can't, mom, I can't do it. I can't do it. Like, you can. And it feels like it's empowering, but I'm just witnessing how actually I am resisting his version of reality when I do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's telling me his story and I'm like, your story's wrong.
Right. I'm telling you, you're going to do this.
And he's like doubling down. Now we go
Yeah.
on the
Yeah,
ground. Now
exactly.
less
Exactly.
clothes are on him somehow. And you're like,
Right.
uh-oh.
Now we're in some real trouble.
Yeah, that's so good. That makes me think like two of the concepts that I really love from like reels you posted that I kind of connected together. It's stuff that I have thought a lot about actually for adults. But it's interesting thinking of it for kids too. So the first piece was like emotional versus thinking brain, like
Mm-hmm.
loving, just
Yes.
acknowledging that those are two states of cognition that we can get into. And if we're in full emotions, we are not really thinking
That's
and
right.
therefore not learning.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard it in the trauma context as described as like if someone's triggered, whether child or adult, if they're triggered, they're in survival brain, and
Yes.
that is different than learning brain.
That's right.
So if we want people to learn, we have to help draw them out of that
Yeah.
emotional survival
Yes.
brain.
Yeah.
And the thing that I paired really well, and that I haven't heard quite this way I loved was like thinking of consequences versus discipline.
Yeah.
And well, okay, now I'm telling you why don't you share that piece of it? I already explained the other,
Sure.
but like tell me what your thoughts are about discipline, consequence, and how that's been useful for yourself and your clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I find that a sticking point for parents often is this idea of discipline, right? So when we're managing challenging behaviors in our kids, we have the sense that we need to discipline them, right? Like we need to do this thing to teach them that what they're doing isn't okay. And really, what we're talking about there's consequences, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want there to be a consequence to the behavior so that they learn that this behavior is not okay, right? And so when we think about consequences, we know that natural consequences, that's okay, right? Because the child's brain is going to be able to make that connection between the consequence that happened and the behavior that resulted in that consequence.
Yeah.
So the example that I often give is like, your kiddo morning routine, we're circling back there again. Your kiddo's going out the door and they're refusing to put on their winter coat, and you say, okay, and the natural consequence of that is they're going to get cold,
Yeah.
right? And so then you can say, okay, next time when I ask you to put on your coat, like this is why.
Yeah.
But an a consequence that wouldn't be an example of a natural consequence is like if you don't put on that coat, then you're actually not going to get to play video games this afternoon, right? They're
Right.
completely distinct events.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline, this is the piece that I think is a really helpful one to consider. So the root of the word discipline is disciple, which is learner. It's to learn. When we're disciplining our kids, really what we want to be doing is teaching them a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're thinking in the context of those challenging behaviors, part of our job as the people who love them is to try to take a step back and think about what is the skill that's lagging here that's getting us in this situation over and over and over. And I find where this gets really frustrating for families is when they consequence a behavior and it doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
And what that suggests is that probably there's a lagging skill there. There's an unsolved problem or a lagging skill. And if we can use that discipline piece, right, that teaching piece,
Yeah.
then we can build up that skill so that actually we see long-term behavior change.
Right.
Yeah. And this comes back to what you were talking about, the thinking brain and the feeling brain.
Yes.
So, when your kid's having a meltdown is not the time to do that teaching because they're in their feeling brain.
Yeah.
And so we need to wait until they're calm again for them to have access to that thinking brain for us to do that teaching piece.
Right. Is that typically like literally another time of day, or is it even like 10, 15 minutes later? I guess it depends
Yeah,
on the
it
child.
depends on the kid. Yeah,
Yeah.
it depends on the
Okay.
kid. Yeah,
So, and also their age and all of that,
for
I would
sure.
imagine, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Younger kids, yeah, you'd want to circle back a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
And I also find more sensitive kids need a bit more space before they're okay to talk about those things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's something even I mean, so it's so funny. So as a family physician, before I had kids, I would have all these parents in my practice coming to me asking me for advice on, I just don't remember, I was a resident. And then this mom came and was like, our kid's having all these tantrums. And and then I was like, I am out of my depth. I do not know what to tell you. Our timeout's okay. Like I had no idea. And then now, so I feel like now being a parent has made me a better clinician because I have more of
Mm-hmm.
that advice. And oh, where was I going with it? Just the idea, like, so oh, I know. There's a lot of like unrealistic expectations of kids developmentally
Mm-hmm.
and then also individually. Like, because like you be maybe working with a child who, the standard deviation would say are capable of learning and holding a certain skill. But actually what is emerging is that they have difficulty with this area because they're neurodivergent or something.
Yeah.
But especially like a really common one is like with parents getting really frustrated about tantrums and getting or frustrated about and they think that their kid is bad and their kid's
Mm-hmm.
like 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
um I'm curious how you handle that. I don't know if that's the age group that comes to you the most or if they would be more older. And even just language that's not shame based for the parent,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because they have been um not disciplining, but they think, they've been consequencing
Yeah.
their 2-year-old in ways that my understanding are not like they're not bad if they
Yeah.
have a tantrum. They're literally having feelings, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So part of it is just normalizing that, right?
Right.
That like
Yeah.
we expect these young kids to have tantrums. We expect them to have these big feelings and to not know how to manage them. I feel like this, in my world anyway, is a really common misconception. This idea that our kids should know how to handle their feelings from a really young age.
Yes.
And what the science around that tells us is like that is not at all the case.
Yeah.
That really the way that we learn to regulate our feelings is by having the repeated experience of having someone come alongside us and help us come back to calm.
Mm.
But that's just so different from how many of us were raised, right?
Oh yeah.
And so it feels really counterintuitive. And that's, I think, a piece of where that disciplining comes in, right? That like, oh, calm down, or like, why are you crying, or what's going on? I think some of that is how we were raised. And so you do what you know, right?
Mhm.
And so I think honoring that too, that like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're doing their very best. But yeah, normalizing, yeah, this is developmentally appropriate. I find that flipping your lid model can be really helpful.
Mm.
And just supporting parents and recognizing that like this thinking brain
Yeah.
doesn't start to really come online until age 5. Like we're not going to really start seeing this be able to manage these big feelings for a few years yet.
Mm.
Maybe temper that because the other thing I'm mindful of is like you don't want to overwhelm them with this idea of like this is going to be years, but
5
like
years, baby.
right.
Buckle up.
But we really want to support them in recognizing that like we need time. That kiddo needs some time, right?
Mm.
They need some time to
Mhm.
mature and have that thinking brain develop to the point where it can start to manage some of those feelings.
Yeah. I also witness, I mean, cognitively and like structurally, the lid is further developed. And depending on what that adult, that parent like has gone through, their lid might flip real fast as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
And that's been my whole thesis. The only thing I am now focused on and becoming a better parent is taking care of myself and parenting myself personally and working on my emotional regulations.
Yeah.
Um I don't know if you found the same, but honestly, like it has to start there anyway.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
yeah, normalizing so beautiful. And then you don't have to then overwhelm the parent with a bunch of strategies per se, but just being like, how are you doing? And can permission to let go of the idea that the kid has to be
Yes.
some kind of way.
Yes. Yeah.
And but then otherwise sort of focusing on like, hey, parent, what do you need to feel more
Yes.
resourced?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still remember, so when I had my third, I also had a 1 and 3-year-old at the time. Um, and he was colicky. And I still remember going to my final midwife visit. It was like my discharge visit. And I had done everything to see how to like fix this kid so he wouldn't just cry all day long. And I remember still like so clearly my midwife sitting me down and saying, like, you've done everything you can to take care of him. You have to take care of you.
Yeah.
And it was like exactly what I needed to hear.
So good. Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
glad you had that. That's so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Because the kid does just keep growing up. It's quite astonishing, no matter
Yeah. That's right.
even however much you try. And like, for me, kid one versus kid two, kid one was pre-pandemic, lots of time, a very hyperactive, anxious brain, and so many parenting books and sleep books. Like one of my big things was just I got really obsessed with the sleep and the
Uh-huh.
naps and the
I can really
training
relate. Yeah.
and woo. And
Yeah.
then later potty training, which was another not very fun adventure. And so now second kid, like say like different child of course, but like I gave birth to him July 2020, so like full pandemic baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like the lowest, like if we all like eat a meal and get out the door today, we are winning.
Yeah.
And so like just the expectation piece is so huge.
Yeah.
And really prioritizing like the kid is fine either way. Like I'm witnessing like they both are developing at similar rates, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know what I
Yeah.
thought, but it's like I think we think that parenting is a lot more hands-on in a certain way than
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this analogy actually that I really love about the gardener and the carpenter. Have you heard this before?
Yes, I love that
Yeah.
analogy.
So there's a whole book on it. I haven't read the book if I'm being
Oh,
honest.
yeah.
But the idea is that like often we think of parenting as like as a carpenter, that our job is to shape and mold our kids into who they are meant to be or
Yeah.
who they will be as adults. And really it can be so helpful instead to look at it as our job as the gardener. And so our job is to give them the environment that they need to thrive and
Mhm.
then to let them grow and bloom into whoever they are.
That was so good. I heard that
Yeah.
on the Hidden Brain podcast. I don't know if that's where you heard
Yeah,
that,
it's
but that was
beautiful. And it
so
just
good.
gives, I think it gives so much freedom to everybody when you can look at it that way, right? Like my
Yeah.
job is to make sure that you grow up in a home where you feel loved and supported and nourished, and we can
Yes.
do all of those things. But then my job also is to give you that freedom and opportunity to do, what it is that you innately are going to do probably anyway, even if I'm over here
Right.
trying to chisel away.
Oh, and this is actually the perfect. I'm not gonna look at my notes somewhere, but this is like the perfect piece because one thing I wanted to say, and I was curious if it's true for you, is that like I said before, becoming a parent has made me a better clinician in terms of practical stuff. So when they're like, I'm worried about this, I'm like, my kids, my kids had all those colors of poops. No worry. Like, and I feel like I've got like kind of credibility in a way that's fun.
Totally. Yeah.
And that particular analogy, and since that, like the way I show up for my patients, I now also witness how I was trained as if I'm supposed to carpenter my patients.
Mhm.
I don't think it's like it's not like the overt message, but it's a lot of underlying messaging. I don't know if I'm curious if it's the same with your training, but like certainly for physicians, you feel like you're going to be judged if your patients aren't compliant. Like
Mm,
literally that's a word that's used if someone's compliant or
okay.
non-compliant to
Okay.
a certain treatment plan. I mean, that's literally kind of carpenter paternalistic mentality, right?
Yeah.
It's like got to get those patients in line.
Yeah.
Yikes is what I think now. Not if anyone out there thinks that I learned it too, I said it too, but like I just don't. First of all, it's not effective, and we have this other analogy that we could be using in what we do for our patients or clients, right? Like we could be offering them our piece of how their garden could grow, and
Yeah.
it includes like really powerful tools that they could be using,
Yeah.
but it's theirs to use and
That's
theirs
right.
to grow,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious for you, like, how has being a parent shifted and informed your practice in terms of what you offer your clients?
Oh man, enormously. Enormously. Like I don't think that I really no, I absolutely did not understand what it meant to be a parent until I walked that walk myself. And so I think I can show up with empathy and understanding in a way that I couldn't before. Um, in many cases, right? I still don't know what it's like to raise a neurodivergent child. Uh, yeah, there are exceptions to this rule, but
Yeah.
I think that there is this sense of like shared humanity there,
Mm,
right? Like we're all kind of in this together and trying to figure it out together and really trying to do the best, the very best that we can for our kids. And so I think it also has given me a real appreciation for that like whatever the choices are that my clients are making, they are making those choices because it's the best they can do, right? We all
mm,
want the best for our kids.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, I hope everyone heard that and uses that as a takeaway that, you know, whatever you're doing in terms of your parenting right now, as you're
Yes.
also trying to work in healthcare, that's a co-message from the both of us. I would say you're doing the best you can,
Yeah.
you know. Any last, yeah, any last words? Like, what has helped you the most, and kept you going through this journey? So where you're still offering care to other people despite also having your family at home and like possibly even a personal life, who knows, but like you and the pandemic keeps swirling, so much keeps changing. I'm sure the demand for your services is higher than ever because
Yeah.
of especially the mental health
Yeah.
concerns and distress of kind of just being traumatized of going through what we've all been through. What keeps you showing up, and helping and serving your clients?
The honest answer is I love it. I
Yeah.
really love it. Yeah, I feel, yeah, it just lights me up.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very rare that I have a day where I think, ugh, at the end of it. It's much more common for me to be like, oh, that was so good. It was so great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the clients I work with. Like I'm really fortunate that, yeah, I just honestly love it.
That's wonderful. And you
Yeah.
said earlier you found the way to give yourself set boundaries or give yourself enough space to continue to love it. Hey, which is such a
Yeah.
critical piece.
Yeah. And a hard one, right? And a hard one because I still like, I have a wait list
Yeah.
that's growing. And that's so stressful as someone who's a healthcare practitioner, knowing that there are people out there looking for care.
Yeah.
And if I did open up more time, yeah, I could help more people. And that was my inclination before. And so this is where, again, having that supportive group to kind of help me keep in line with my values and recognizing that like I'm going to show up as a better person for the clients I do see and a better person for my family and the rest of my life, right? If I can kind of keep those things a little bit in check.
Oh, that's such a wonderful model. I hope everyone thinks about doing that for that. It's not easy work to do,
No.
and I think a lot of people, I think everywhere, especially healthcare, think they literally don't have a choice about doing less. But I think otherwise you do too much until you leave, which is what
Yeah.
a lot of people
Yeah.
are doing. And there has to be a middle way. Like,
That's right. There has to be. There has to be. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving so much of your time.
Yeah.
I
Thank you for
feel
having me.
I learned a lot as well. I'll definitely make sure that I link your website. Is there do you want to say like where they can find you
Yeah,
on
for
the
sure.
internet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my website is Shannon Rolph, ROLPH .ca. CA. Oh my goodness, I should know that. .ca. And so go there, and then there's a resources tab where you can find that visual schedule that I
Yeah.
mentioned.
Oh,
So hop on and grab that and make your morning routine a little bit easier. And then I also show up on Instagram semi-regularly, and that's at shannon.rolph.ot.
yeah, so good. That's the one with the consequence and discipline. I'm like,
Yeah.
that is good. So awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Joan.